How many goblins could a goblin gob if a goblin could gob goblins?
Hey gang! Using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. You may also want to know that Flipside Gaming is doing another giveaway, this time for Core Set 2021. By placing an order of $10 or more, or alternatively, you can send a stamped, self-addressed envelope or postcard to the following address. Either of these options will get you entered to win, and please bear in mind, it's one entry per person. The contest will run from June 15th until July 3rd, 2020. Today's game takes place at Wizard's Tower in Ottawa, Ontario, and it has me playing Mistform Ultimus. I keep a Ghost Quarter, 2 islands, Sword of the Anime, Mind Over Matter, Cavern of Souls, and Relic of Progenitus. Emil is playing his Chainer deck, keeping 3 Snow-Covered Swamps, Damnation, Mindstone, Vampiric Tutor, and an Anvil of Bogarden. Jeff is playing Ezuri, keeping a Triskelion, Fungal Sprouting, Rhystic Study, 2 Forests, Breeding Pool, and Temple of the False God. Connor is playing his Thelon of the Havenwood, keeping a Thallid Soothsayer, Spore Sower Thallid, 2 Forests, Command Tower, Driven, and Reliquary Tower. Emil wins a die roll and starts us off. Emil plays a Snow-Covered Swamp, passing. I play an island and cast a Relic of Progenitus. Jeff plays a tap Breeding Pool. Connor plays a tap Jungle Hollow, gaining 1 life as it enters. At the end of turn, Emil casts a Vampiric Tutor, losing 2 life to find a card and put it on top. Emil draws the card he put on top and casts it, playing out a Mana Crypt. He then taps the Crypt for a Mind Stone, and then the Mind Stone and a Swamp for his Anvil of Bogarden. For my turn, I draw 2 and discard one of them because of the Anvil, pitching an island. I play an island and cast Sapphire Medallion for turn before passing. Jeff draws his 2 and discards a forest from between them. He then plays out another forest, casts Sylvan Library, passing. Connor draws 2 and discards one of them, pitching a forest as well. He plays Command Tower and casts a Rampant Growth before passing. Emil rolls for his Crypt and avoids the damage. He draws 2 and discards a Snow-Covered Swamp. He plays a really early Yawgmoth's Will, playing the swamp from the yard as his land for turn, and then recasting Vampiric Tutor again, which gets exiled. This has him losing 2 life as he goes to find a card for the top of his library, and he passes as he searches. I draw 2 and discard another island. I play a Cavern of Souls and name Wizards as it comes in, and play out a Stony Brook Banneret for 1 because of the medallion reducing the cost, and then need only tap 2 for a very reduced costing Mistform Ultimus. Jeff uses his library and draws another card with the Anvil. He discards 1 and doesn't keep any extras with the library, playing out a forest before casting a Rhystic Study and passing. Connor plays a swamp and casts a Spore Sower Thallid, which took me 6 times to say correctly, and he lets Jeff draw, passing turn. Emil correctly calls his Mana Crypt trigger and doesn't take damage, playing a Citadel of Bolas in his main phase. He can't pay the 1, which lets Jeff draw. Emil then looks at his top card once it resolves, and casts Moonlight Bargain off the top for 5 life with the Citadel. This has him looking at his top 5 cards, while Jeff draws because Emil can't pay the study cost. Emil decides to lose 2 life to keep one of the cards, and bins the rest. He then looks at his top card again, playing a Snow-Covered Swamp off the top as his land for turn. Emil then pays 1 black for Reanimate, and Jeff draws again, while Emil loses 5 life to bring back Grey Merchant of Asphodel from his yard. With it entering, it sees 5 devotion to black, and Emil drains his opponents for 5 and gains 15. He then looks again, casting Dark Deal off the top and losing 3. Jeff draws again from the study, and the deal then resolves. We all pitch our hands and draw that many, -1, and with nothing else, Emil passes. I draw for turn, and cast Trinket Mage, letting Jeff draw his card from the study trigger. I reveal and cast a Soul Ring, and then tap the Soul Ring for a Thought Vessel. Jeff draws again, and I head to combat, deciding it's pointless to go to Emil right now, and pass. Jeff remembers his anvil trigger, which can't be said about the rest of us, drawing 2 and discarding 1. He plays a command tower for turn, and brings out Ezuri. He then passes to Connor. Connor gets a spore counter on his Thelon on his upkeep, and draws. He discards a Golgari Guildmage from the anvil trigger, and plays out another swamp. 2 mana gets him a Golgari Signet, and he pays the 1 for it before casting Putrefy to destroy the Citadel. This lets Jeff draw a card, and Connor then passes. Emil rolls for his Crypt and avoids taking damage. He discards a card of the anvil trigger after drawing his 2, and he casts the Immortal Sun. He thinks about it, and decides to pay the 1 for the study trigger before passing. I draw my 2 to the anvil, discarding Mirage Mirror. I play an island and cast a Zami in my main phase. I pay the 1 for the study, and pass to Jeff. Jeff does his anvil and library triggers, not keeping any extras, and discarding Simic Ascendancy. He plays an island for his land drop, and casts a Thrumming Bird. This gives him an experience counter with Ezuri, and Jeff then plays out Swiftfoot Boots, putting them onto the flyer. He goes to combat, putting Ezuri's +1/+1 counter onto the flyer, and goes at Emil for 2. With the creature connecting, Jeff gets to proliferate, and gives himself another experience counter, and gives the Thrumming Bird one as well, and nicely gives Connor's Thelon a spore counter as well. Connor adds his spore counter, and draws and discards from the anvil. He taps 5 for Black Market, and doesn't pay the 1 for the study, letting Jeff draw, and he passes turn. Emil doesn't take damage from the Crypt, and draws 3 cards on his turn, 1 from the anvil, 1 from the sun, and 1 for turn. He discards a Snow-Covered Swamp, and taps 5 mana for a Caged Sun because of the reduction from the Immortal Sun. With the spell in the stack, I tap 3 wizards to draw 3 cards. None of them are counters, and I tap Mistform to draw a 4th. Emil doesn't pay the 1, and Jeff gets to draw, and the sun then resolves with Emil naming black as it enters. He then taps a few lands to cast Living Death, which I'm ready for with a Swan Song, and I tap my Soul Ring to pay for the study cost. Before we then change phases, with the 1 floating mana for my Soul Ring still left, I activate my Relic of Progenitus to exile all graveyards and draw a card. I draw for turn with the anvil, discarding an island, and then playing 1. I pay for a Grand Architect, paying the 1 for the study. I pay 1 blue for a Gale Rider Sliver, paying the 1 again for the study. I then tap 2 blue creatures to the Architect's ability, making 4 colorless for artifact spells or abilities, and I cast Sword of Light and Shadow. I pay the 1 extra for the study trigger, and I then tap my Soul Ring to equip Mistform Ultimus with the sword. I go to combat, swinging Mistform at Emil, who blocks the very swan that I gave him, which I think is very rude. I pass while Connor finds a die for his Black Market. Jeff draws his cards from the library and the anvil, not keeping any spares, and he discards a Fathom Mage. He casts a Beast Whisperer in his main phase, and heads to combat. The Ezuri trigger goes off, adding more counters to his Thrumming Bird, and he swings it at Emil for 6. It connects, proliferating again, and once more, he upticks his own permanents and counters that he can, as well as Connor's, and he then passes turn. Connor adds another spore counter to his Thalid, and using the mana from the market, casts Nullmage Shepherd. He pays the 1 to deny Jeff the draw, and passes. Emil fails his mana crypt roll, losing 3 in his upkeep, and draws his 3 for turn before discarding Ad Nauseam from the 3. He plays a Cabal Coffers, activating it for 5 black mana, and casts a Mutilate. With the board wipe on the stack, I tap more wizards to draw 3. I can't respond, which prompts Jeff once he has priority to use Force of Negation by exiling a blue card from hand. Connor also removes some spore counters from his Thalid to make a Saproling. Emil then casts Beseech the Queen, finding a card with a converted mana cost of 6 or less, which is a Toxic Deluge in this case. He casts it, putting 7 life into the spell, but once more Jeff is ready for it, using Counterspell to stop it. Emil then tries for the 3rd time this turn to cast a spell, putting to stack a Buried Alive, which he's surprised to see resolve. I draw my 2 and discard an island. I play 1 for turn, and tap 3 wizards to draw 3 cards. I play out a Master of Pearl Tridents, paying the 1 for Jeff's study trigger. I then head to combat, swinging 7 commander damage with the Mistform at Jeff. He can't block because of the island walk and flying, and takes it. Emil reveals his 3 creatures going to the bin, putting Mikaeus, Kakusho, and Yawgmoth to the graveyard, and I pass to Jeff. Jeff draws his cards, and puts some back after discarding, and plays a forest. He casts a Glenelender Archmage, and responding to the draw trigger from the Whisperer, I attempt to counter and draw a card with Cryptic Command. Jeff uses Mana Drain to counter my counter, and then draws from the Whisperer trigger, and then the Archmage resolves. Moving to combat, the Whisperer gets 5+1/+1 counters because of Ezuri, and he swings the Thrumming Bird at Emil and the Whisperer at me. We both just take the hits, and Jeff then proliferates again, adding more counters to only his side of the board this time as he passes to Connor. Connor gets another Spore counter on his Thalid, and then removes some to make another token. He plays a Bajuka Bog, which comes in tapped, and exiles Emil's Yard. He then taps 4 to activate the Null Mage, remembering that he needed to discard a card to the Anvil. He pitches a Harvest Season, and decides not to destroy anything with his Null Mage. He tells Jeff he needs to resolve a card from his hand, and that he'd really prefer it not be countered. Jeff says that he can't make any promises, so Connor passes, saying he'll be watching. Emil succeeds for his Mana Crypt roll, and draws 3 for turn before discarding a Charcoal Diamond from among the 3. He activates the Cabal Coffers, making 6 black mana, and casts Chainer, paying the 1. He then plays out Phyrexian Arena, and passes to me. I draw my 2, and discard Reliquary Tower from among them, playing an island. I cast a Marrow-Regery, and then a Trophy Mage, paying the 1 for both spells to deny Jeff the cards. The Trophy Mage then hits the field, and I get to go and find a 2-drop artifact. It's Vidalcan Shackles, which I cast by tapping my Grand Architect. Jeff sadly counters it with his Glenelendra Archmage, sacrificing it, and it heads to the graveyard and gets a Persist trigger. With the trigger on the stack, Emil activates Chainer, losing 3 life, to reanimate at instant speed the Archmage and effectively steals it from Jeff. Going to combat, the Mistform, the Master, and the Banneret go at Jeff. The Mistform and Banneret can't be blocked because of Island Walk, and Jeff just decides to take the full hit, taking 16, half of which is commander damage. I then get my first sword trigger of the game, gaining 3 life, but have nothing to return to hand from my yard. Jeff draws his cards from the Anvil and Library, and puts some back, and plays an island. He gains the mana from Mana Drain in his main phase, and casts a Walking Ballista, putting 1 mana into the X. It comes in with a +1/+1 counter, and gains him an experience counter. He then plays a Hangerback Walker, putting the same into the X's, and it comes in with a +1/+1 counter as well. With the second trigger from Ezuri for the experience gain, Connor taps 4 to destroy the Hangerback. With the Thopter dying, Jeff gains a trigger, and this prompts Connor to cast Crossing Grip on the Ballista, destroying it. The Black Market also gains a few more counters, and Jeff remembers to draw from the Beast Whisperer as well. Jeff then uses his floating mana and some green to cast a Craterhoof Behemoth. With the hoof on the stack, I tap 2 wizards to draw 2 cards and hopefully find a counter. I don't, and Jeff's board then gets pumped by +5/+5 and Trample, and he moves to combat. He gets to put 9 more +1/+1 counters onto something, and he puts them on the hoof. He asks how much life I have. We then count up how much I can block and how much life I have, and he swings the Thrumming Bird, Whisperer, and hoof at me. Even if I block, it's still enough to take me out, and Jeff then passes as he proliferates because of the Thrumming Bird connecting. Connor untaps and gets his Spore counter on his Thalid. He draws 2 from the Anvil and for turn, and discards a Forest. He gains 7 black mana in his main phase, and uses 2 for a Death Spore Thalid, and uses the remaining plus a green for Doubling Season. He then brings in Thelon of the Havenwood, paying the study tax, and he passes turn. Emil is able to dodge taking damage from his Mana Crypt, but sadly still loses 1 on his upkeep from the Phyrexian Arena. He draws his cards and discards a Gilded Lotus, before playing a Snow-Covered Swamp for his land for turn. He casts Memory Jar after activating the Cabal Coffers, and then activates the jar. This has the table set aside their hands and draw a fresh 7. Emil then casts Graveborn Muse, Thran Dynamo, and a Perpetual Timepiece. He activates the Timepiece to mill himself for 2, and we see one of those cards is a Corpse Connoisseur, which Emil then unearths after tapping some mana. With it coming in, it lets him go to his library to find another creature card to put to his graveyard. He decides on Krav, and we see the demon hit the graveyard, which Jeff asks to see, and Emil then activates Chainer, losing 3 life to bring back Krav. Moving to combat, Emil swings the Glenelendra Archmage, Chainer, and Gary at Jeff. We have to do a quick count-up because of the Immortal Sun and Cage Sun pumping some stuff but not others, and Jeff blocks Chainer with a Thopter token, taking 8 damage from the unblocked sources. In his post-combat main phase, Emil sacrifices the Grey Merchant to Krav, and then activates Chainer to bring it back with the Krav trigger still in the stack. With the Merchant's trigger on the stack, Connor then taps 4 creatures to activate the Null Mage, destroying the arena to deny 2 devotion to black. Emil still gets to drain his opponents for 8, gaining 16 once the trigger resolves, and he also gets to draw a card and gain 1 life from Krav's ability. This is sadly enough to drain Jeff out though, and Emil then passes, exiling the Corpse Connoisseur, and they then discard their hands and put the cards they'd exiled earlier from the memory jar back to hand. Connor also remembers to add more counters to his black market. Connor untaps and puts spore counters on what needs it. He draws and discards a forest to the anvil, and doesn't really have much to do at this point, so he simply passes. Emil calls his crypt trigger, and loses 2 on his upkeep to the Graveborn Muse, drawing 2. He then draws more to the anvil and the Immortal Sun, and for turn, discarding a Thought Vessel. He activates the coffers, making some black mana, and sacrifices the Grey Merchant to Krav's ability. Connor responds, removing some counters to make Saprolanes, and then casts a Sprout Swarm, but quickly realizes Emil is going to be able to do this several more times on his turn, and at instant speed, to drain Connor out of his remaining life, and Connor concedes the game to Emil. Game review time. So, unfortunately I think Jeff and I near the end of the game got a little too focused on who was the bigger threat and kinda left Emil alone. It should have been very apparent to both of us how dangerous a Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Chainer are together, and all Emil was really missing was a sack outlet. That being said, we did do a pretty decent job of keeping Emil back once he had that explosive start, and until he found the memory jar, I think he was really far behind. I will say that I was a bit confused why Connor wasn't using his Null Mage Shepherd a bit more aggressively. He certainly could have done it at the end of Jeff's turn and blown up some troublesome permanents like the Immortal Sun or Cage Sun or any of those other things. I guess because of his board state, he was the furthest behind, so he didn't want to make a bunch of enemies. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta, and lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.